The International School for Development Justice at UWI presents the SDGs and You, Making Connections for Progress webinar series. Starting September 17th and continuing on every third Wednesday of the month, we explore the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, what they are, their impact on Caribbean people, and the progress and challenges we face. Join us for 12 dynamic sessions with local and global experts. Ask questions, share your story, and make connections for progress. The SDGs and You webinar series. Register today.
This is a conversation that we're going to be having about something that has been at the center of our concerns. I am most honored to have been invited by my colleague and friend, Laura. Thank you so much, to share with you IGDS's and my own focus on Goal 5, which is gender equality. Now, you would have heard all about these goals. We went through the introduction, the SDGs and You, but I hope that at the end of this discussion, let's say 20, 30 minutes, this presentation, and as we start to discuss, you would realize there are some measures, some approaches, some strategies that you can do, or you can continue, or you can escalate in order for us to get closer to what is supposed to be a shared global goal. So, as I said, we want to embark on what appears on the face to be a really clear commitment across the globe. However, as we will see as we discuss Goal 5 in particular, but I suggest it applies to the other goals, we will see that these come with nuances, complications, challenges by region, by institution, through political will, through social norms and beliefs, and so much more, be it about climate change, gender equality, political institutions, whatever it may be. So your takeaways today specifically is to definitely define equality and equity. And though Goal 5 states gender equality in particular, for us at the Institute for Gender and Development Studies and most Caribbean feminists and feminists globally, we understand that equality is tied intimately to the idea of equity. So we'll explain how these two come together. We understand how equality and equity can be used to achieve fairness and justice. And all of us on the same path together, and we bring along those who are not on the same level or at the same point in their development, in their progress as a society. Awareness of gains and challenges for varying groups of gendered people. Of course, many people still remain within the binary notion of men, women, boys, and girls, but we know that we live in these bodies, but we live within bodies that are within this binary and outside of this binary. So we want to understand equality and equity across the board, all human entities. Identify some work that the IGDS, where I work, we are a regional institute within the UWI, and what we do across the region and with partners, locally, regional, internationally, to progress this goal. Those are your takeaways. We define it, we understand the connections, we come in to some sort of understanding about our gains and our challenges, and then we're seeing what have we done. And then we have a discussion together, taking your questions, comments, observations, and so forth. But just a quick reminder, because we all know of the SDGs, but sometimes it's not at the forefront of our mind. The SDGs is really, in a big way, three main things. Right? It's a call to action. Universal, I've been saying, all of us across the globe have agreed that by 2030, and of course, hopefully, and beyond, all people will live peace and prosperity. But we look at this, obviously, as something that we've hopefully internalized, but we know that we confront threats and challenges to that universal call to action and agreement as we live, right? So it is something that is happening within volatile and complex situations. The other big thing about the SDGs is that it is integrated sustainable development goals. There are 17 of them, and they work together. We isolate one today because we want to understand a major one that is something that we have progressed, but we continue to fight for across the globe. Action in one area will affect outcomes in another. Development must be balanced. So we have to balance the social, the economic, the environmental, I would dare say the political, the ideological for sustainability, which in itself is a contentious word because sustainable for whom, for what, and with what effect. And then priorities. We have a call to action, we have an agreement, we have this integrated approach, but what are our core priorities? Well, as we are now in the contemporary, hunger and poverty. People still live in hunger and poverty, and the SDGs are to eliminate, mitigate, reduce, prevent, protect the planet. And this, incidentally, is a point for debate, but for example, the Caribbean, small island developing states in particular, we feel the challenges that we face by climate change and other environmental issues. And so for us, this is even more pressing, and for the globe, it is pressing. And then progress those who are furthest behind. The principle of equality, equity, and by extension, justice toward equal and equitable societies. So the SDGs as a whole, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, are integrated approaches, actions, agreements that will fulfill this fundamental quest for cohesion, peace, and prosperity for all. So let's get down to SDG 5. SDG 5 asserts achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. And this year's International Women's Day, International Women's Month, we're in March 2026, is rights, justice, action for all women and girls, that all being emphasized. Because it's very easy for us to say when we think about equality, when we think about equity, when we think about justice, oh, we've made so many gains. You know, we mostly have so much. You know, I went through the media rounds around IWD March 8 and for the month, and a lot of questions that were posed to me by the media. We've gained so much. Women have so much. Girls have so much. What else is there to be done? But that takes a perspective, a singular or limited, or just a few perspectives of our own privilege. And we do not imagine the lives and realities of those who are not like ourselves. So we say all because if one of us is not enjoying equity, equality, and justice, then none of us can fully enjoy it. So as part of this declaration, remember, call to action, let us come together to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. How do we do that? We have 9 goal targets. One of them, the first, and I'll just go through them, but not overly elaborate, because as I said, we have a certain amount of time. But if you have any question about any of these, please do not hesitate to ask or to comment. When we think of these targets, in order to achieve equality and empower, we want to end all forms of discrimination. Why? Because discrimination becomes almost like those conditions that reproduce inequality, reinforce inequality as a norm, reinforce injustice as norm. So if we end that discrimination, then we draw back on those conditions, those situations that undermine our approach to equality, undermine our quest for gender equality. Similarly, eliminate all forms of violence. And of course, violence affects all people in our society, but women and girls globally encounter, both in the public and private, particular forms of gendered violence, just to name a few: trafficking, sexual violence, and so forth, and exploitation. And this is perpetuated across generations. So we want no one in our society to encounter violence, but we want women and girls who are especially vulnerable to multiple forms of violence within the family, within the private and public space, to be eliminated. Because as I said, just as with discrimination, this reproduces inequality as the norm. We need to eliminate that reproducing mechanism. Seems as if I needed to be eating some lunch while presenting with you. We want to eliminate harmful practices, because this is a point I think we need to always keep in mind. We, in our societies, in our spaces and places, can become complicit, whether intentionally or unintentionally, and engage in practices that are tradition, that are normative, that reinforce, let's say, some ethical beliefs but undermine others, that are rooted in our faith traditions, whatever religion we may pursue, that are part of our state systems and our citizenship and our education systems. And these practices may not be seen as harmful, or may be seen as harmful but necessary. So they're very nuanced. But these then become the site of inequality. And so when we think of SDG 5, we pinpoint these and say, these must then be eliminated, because only with their removal from our everyday, from our modus operandi, can we get closer to gender equality. Recognize and value unpaid care and domestic work. And this is important. And of course, it elaborates how that will be done through public services, infrastructure, social protection, and so much more. But this is important because when it comes to women, especially, and some girls, it encumbers their capacity to actively participate in the operations of society. Because as they engage in reproductive and nurturing and sexual and care labor and emotional labor, their productive labor is, again, curtailed, limited. So you have the freedom and self-determination and education as one set of conditions, but you have a set of other conditions that impinge even in our contemporary. So you would see that that fourth target recognizes those complicated relationships we have with what we do on an everyday basis. I know I'm saying a lot and I'm saying it quickly, but you can always take a note and we'll come back to it at the end. We go to target number 5, ensure full and effective participation and equal opportunity. So this is important because often we hear someone say, oh, I can count sexed bodies. We have 10 women and 10 men. Equality, same number. No, if you're present, are you actively participating? Are you effectively participating even when you have the seat at the table? Or is the seat at the table or is it adjacent to the table? Do you have the opportunities to choose? Do you have the opportunities and freedoms to make choices, to enter into spaces and participate, whether it's in political, economic, and public life, whether you be subject to social sanction, or whether the structures in place undermine your capacity to act? So that's why that's a target, because yes, on the face of it, you can go and do whatever you want to do depending on where you are located, because not all experience the same reality. But even where that presents directly to you, you may not be able to fulfill that thing you have been led to take for granted in the way that you expect. So that's the 5th target. 6th target, universal access to sexual and reproductive health and reproductive rights. From a young age, education, and as we progress through puberty into adulthood, into elderly, that we can have this access, this knowledge, this capacity, this choice. We know that this is a tenuous discussion because of the taboos around sex and reproduction and relationships. In the Caribbean, these taboos are powerful and impinge upon us. But our societies, like global societies, must recognize the significance of these conditions being in place to get closer to equality. So you saw on the last page, we wanted to remove conditions that impinge upon equality. Now we find ourselves in the rest of targets looking at those conditions that will propel equality along. So of the 9, we have about 4 that we need to remove from our system. And then we have about 5 that we need to add and cultivate and feed into our system. And they're on 2 separate slides. 7, undertake reforms to give women equal rights to economic resources and access to ownership and control. A big conversation around climate resilience. is land ownership, property ownership, that capacity to be resilient and bounce back and innovate is not enjoyed everywhere by all women and girls in particular, or even all people. So this definitely, in terms of Goal 5, we focus on the conditions that women and girls experience. But when we think of equality, equity, and justice, which we will define very shortly, we think of all people who find themselves vulnerable in economic structures and systems that say some can and some cannot. Because I will say we operate in capitalist, patriarchal, liberal societies. We are governed by the market, capitalism. We are liberal, freedom and wealth trickling down, and patriarchal. We have differential distribution of privilege and power and access. So target 8 says, enhance the use of enabling technologies. This way, it gives access to information, to communications. This becomes that channel, that platform which we empower voice. That platform which we empower creativity, that platform which we empower that active, effective participation we saw with Goal 5, with Target 5. And then finally, 9, adopt and strengthen strong policies and enforceable legislation. We can't just speak to things. We can't just come and parade. We can't have visibility events or declarations or even assertions in public spaces. We must back it up by these policy, legislative, and regulatory frameworks that empower, enhance, create the capacity to act in the interest of equality. So just to wrap up, SDG 5, achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. And this is through 9 targets. And these targets, either 4 of them say, remove those conditions that impinge and undermine equality or journey to equality. And 5 more include and enhance those that progress our achievement of equality. So what's this equality we're talking about? Just generally, equality is not sameness. Very important. Not the same. We're not the same. We relish our differences and our variation and our diversity and our uniqueness. That is important. But equality is that everyone has a chance. Everyone has a chance. They're given the same resources or sets of resources and opportunities that they can thrive. They can have a chance and a choice. And that chance and choice is to freedom, self-determination, and agency. So everyone is given equal treatment regardless of circumstances. It's not, well, I'm giving these people a chance because they look like me, they are me, they from where I'm from, they believe what I believe. It's that wherever you are, whatever you're doing, an opportunity is there, a circumstance is there, a table is there, and you want to try that seat, you enter into that space, you present yourself according to the same criteria as everyone else, and as you perform, as you express, as you become, as you articulate, you can have access or not. So you have a chance and a choice to be agentic, active in your participation and your action. The principle assumes anyone can reach their goals or achievements based on contributions and effort and not social position. So you're not having that edge from behind. You're not having, as we say in the Caribbean, you don't have a links and you don't have something that is creating benefiting conditions for you while others are not enjoying that. That's not equality, right? But equality sounds great. It is incomplete. That is why we encourage at IGDS for sure, and all of the proponents of SDG 5 that we think of equality in relation to equity. Equity, I think I jumped ahead a little too much. Forgive me, I'll come back to that slide. Equity is about recognizing equal So we say everybody should have agency and choice and all of this, but recognizing that individuals have different needs. They have different needs, and thus they have to be allocated resources variably. I don't want to use differently for a reason. Differently suggests that it's one versus the other. But variably says that there are multiple conditions, multiple factors that you have to think about. In the Caribbean, we practice intersectionality, i.e., all of these social identities that we occupy, our race, our ethnicity, our class, our gender, our sexuality, our religion, our nationhood, our citizenship, our age, these come together and intersect and construct varying sets of needs, varying sets of packages of resources that we need across societies. And equity points us to that. Equity says here what? Not everybody enters this choice game, this chance, in the same place. As it says, based on those needs to achieve an outcome, an equal outcome for all. So equity says everybody gets a chance, but we consider those circumstances that impinge upon, mitigate, influence, mediate that chance. Some people and groups face more hardships than others, adverse circumstances that make it more challenging to achieve goals, even with perseverance. It's not because you didn't work hard enough. It's not where you're starting or where you're located or how you're located, with whom. What are the effects of those people? Equity attempts to identify imbalances and find ways to restore fairness and justice. So, equality is at the core of the articulated goal, SDG 5. Equity, it is buttressing, it is underlying assumption that based on those 9 targets that we're really and truly embedding, mapping in our action a quest for fairness and justice. And so, as I've already been alluding to, equity in our communities, wherever we may be located, establishes stronger social connection and fosters empathy and compassion, improves quality of life, provides resources needed to thrive based on those varying social identities, that intersectionality, and supports social and economic sustainability, and hopefully reduces conflict. We have a challenge with conflict, but conflict can be functional depending on how we address it. So it's important for us to keep this in mind, because the targets for Goal 5 said take all those things that impinge upon equality, add those things that will progress it. But people, systems, structures, societies are the ones who have to take the action. And so we have to consider at the level of our humanity, our communicating humanity in relationships, small, group, social, community, nations. What are the behavioral conditions we want in place? And that's what this benefits, or this important elements is drawing your attention to. We create kind of a sense of self and the other, that we will follow those targets in particular ways. Connected, empathetic, supportive, and structurally sound measures. In terms of equality, oopsie. Did I just, I think I just defined equity as equality. So it all adds to progressing SDG 5, even if I made a little bit of a mistake there. So the last set that I said is for behavioral. It's about the benefits of equality. And this second set is about the benefits of equity, okay? Now, what is those behavioral conditions to get the targets I mentioned? We want to promote inclusivity. Remember, we said end discrimination. We end discrimination and we have inclusion. Many times we have exclusive inclusivity, some people in the circle and other people on the outside and on the outside and on the outside. We want to then promote inclusivity that's embracing, that opens up that circle and has it flowing, that people can then find belonging and recognition and significance, encourage class engagement and participant, provide a say. In terms of here, I would have had classroom from a presentation prior, but in terms, here we mean class as in social identity, class, race, gender, etc. Provide a safe space. Our students, our participants, our people feel supported and respected, and higher quality programs and materials. Now, you will see this is referring to the education base, because I'm speaking to you from the perspective of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, the University of the West Indies. And for us at the University of the West Indies, this is what we promote. One of our central pillars is gender justice. And what is that condition for justice? Equity, equality. And so when we think of ourselves in our programs, in your participation, we're thinking of the image on there, right alongside the proponents of the image on the left. It's a classic image. It comes in multiple forms that really establishes at a glance the difference between equity and equality. It's 12:28, so I'm going to move along to some of the gains, and I'm speaking from the Caribbean context. When we think of gender equality and we think of SDG 5, we have made some strides. We have achieved some things, particularly for women and girls. SDG 5 focuses on women and girls. We have stepped closer in terms of higher education attainment for women, economic reforms and participation with increased workforce participation for women. We have achieved legal reforms to protect women's rights and their well-being. We have achieved political and institutional leadership, and we have achieved policy initiatives. For example, in Trinidad and Tobago, we have a plan of action plan for women, peace, and security. And this is being duplicated in Guyana, in Barbados, in Jamaica, and other islands and other territories are coming along. It's not quite finished yet, but it's in progress. Just by one example, of course. And these reforms, these legislative innovations and interventions, these policy innovations and interventions, these trends in education and the workplace are not coming from nowhere. They come from our history, our contention and our response back to our post-colonial heritage in terms of slavery and indentureship and colonialism, neoliberalism. It comes from our gendered relations and dynamics on how people find survivability and sustainability within families and perform breadwinning roles, perform roles in the productive sphere and care for families. And because of all of these conditionalities coming together, we see over time from the 20th century to the 21st century, in this contemporary moment, considerable gains, considerable conditionalities having been put in place, agreements that have been put in place in response to the call to action that is SDG 5 in particular. But be that as it may, in the world over and in the Caribbean, things are always nuanced. There's always some degree of contention and contradiction and tension because we live real world with real lives. And so we have some challenges as well. And these are rooted in structural patriarchy. We live in patriarchal states, i.e., not the rule of the father, though it comes from that etymology, that we live in states that set up a system that says some groups of people receive more value and privilege than other groups of people. And the hierarchy as it is now is men and boys, women and girls, gender non-conforming people. On the face of it, everything is open to argument. Now, within these groups of people, patriarchy also dictates different levels of privilege and access and value to different types of men and boys, different types of women and girls, different types of gender non-conforming people. So fundamentally, we are up against this structure that organizes our world, our relationships, the social relations of gender, the ideological and material, right? Then, of course, as I mentioned already, we have colonial legacies. And these colonial legacies in the Caribbean in particular, and many global South countries, continue to interrupt how we progress ourselves, how we are progressed by others, and how we understand our reality. And then I mentioned intersectionality, those multiple social identities, race, class, gender, sexuality, the inequalities that rest in them coalesce, combine, and come together and start to shape those different needs, resources, actions that we can take to get closer to equality and equity. So in the Caribbean in particular, and I do believe we share this in other parts of the world, both global north and global south, gender-based violence continues to be an inherited and perpetuating problem. It is endemic. A high prevalence against women and girls in particular is a major obstacle. All peoples experience gender-based violence, but the trends remain that women and girls find themselves particularly vulnerable. And this is not out of nowhere. It rests in our ways of thinking, our ideals around femininities and masculinities. So we confront that. We have economic disparity. Yes, women are excelling academically, they're participating in the workforce, but there continues to be wage gaps and limits or challenges accessing higher level financing, especially for business, tied to ownership issues, and so much more. Then we have limits to transformative action. So we've been talking about we're up against a structural patriarchy, colonial legacies, and intersectional inequalities. We're up against our culture. We are up against our structure. We're up against those frames that we have in place. So tackling, disrupting, and dismantling those systemic within our system and structures that build our society, difficult. There's resistance, there are barriers, there are gaps, and they contend with contrary belief systems. And then political and decision-making representation. We do have women in positions of leadership, both in terms of public, private, and so much more. But the level of representation in terms of active participation, not presence, absence, but active participation continues to be a challenge. Let's look at IGDS as we bring our conversation to the last leg. The Institute for Gender and Development Studies is an institute of the University of the West Indies. It's a regional institute with offices in Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, and Jamaica. And we have one major regional coordinating office that is located at the UWI Center in Jamaica, our three units across the region. And we're aiming to have gender studies represented at the Five Islands campus. That's a goal. For over 35 years, the IGDS, for short, has committed itself to gender equality, equity, and justice, and committed itself as part of the UWI's larger commitment to gender justice. And all of these things that we've asserted when we look at SDG 5 in particular. And this is embedded in our teaching and learning, our courses, our programs, our major courses and programs, undergraduate and postgraduate certificate, short courses, continuing education, our outreach and advocacy. What are we doing in community? Who are we collaborating with, partnering with? What impacts are we seeking to have in community? And then our research and knowledge production. What are we studying? What are we writing about? What are we elaborating, interrogating, evaluating, and articulating? Now, this is in fact a banner that we have in the offline that we share when we go out in community, whether it's for teaching purposes or community engagements. And you will see, I know it's a little bit small because I just rendered it for you to see one thing. Not only the broad streams and that it's embedded across all of our work, but the center line shows that integration of the SDGs. Remember, we said one set of goals affects another set of goals. One goal affects the other. And while IGDS is properly rooted in SDG 5, gender equality, we're also properly rooted in quality education, SDG 4, in combating inequalities, SDG 10, in achieving climate action and climate security, SDG 13, in achieving peace and security and safe institutions, SDG 16. These things intersect as we do research, whether it's on child marriages, it's on transformative behavior change around gender-based violence. It's about sexuality. It's about men and masculinities. It's about human work and labor, about gender-responsive budgeting, whatever it may be in our research agenda. Cultural products. These goals intersect with each other. When we teach, our courses cover a broad cross-section of goals, always and every time, right? So just for an example, we've also partnered our regional partners at the MONA in our Shiro's Caribbean Academy, developing training manuals, developing policies, developing toolkits. It's just one example. So thinking, what can you do? How can you get involved with the SDGs? You can jump in to the UE, join the IGDS, join other departments depending on your interest. Take up some of the new programs in the International School for Development Justice, or come to our sessions wherever you may be located, whether they're online like this one or they're face-to-face if you are in situ, and engage, because the engagements help us understand our targets, our approach, and the things we take for granted. And finally, for the IGDS, shameless plug or deliberate plug, you can get an edge above the rest. Why? Because gender addresses life and livelihood. Gender equality says we want to have that chance considering different vulnerabilities, equity across life and livelihood. So you could be doing communication, you could be doing science. These are just some examples: law, international relations, management, engineering. You can do it with gender because gender is always there. If you incorporate it into your unique everyday practice, you too take one step closer to SDG 5, gender equality. And so with that, I wrap up and I thank you so much for your attention. I really appreciate your time and welcome your questions or comments based on your own understanding of SDG 5 or anything that I would have presented. Over to you, Dr. Pilgrim.
Thank you so much, Dr. Barrett. We appreciate your comprehensive addressing of SDG 5. Thank you for that. And the floor is open to questions. I see that Monica Aznani has a question. Monica, do you want to open your mic and just ask?
Hi, good. It's morning here at Mona, Jamaica. I am absolutely not of your faculty. I'm in the Faculty of Medical Sciences, but actually I'm a regional, I work at CARE at the Sickle Cell Unit. I'm the director of the Sickle Cell Unit. So definitely a fish out of water. But I saw this pop up today and it's very interesting, and I had the hour that I could join in. So thank you, Dr. Barrett. I don't really have a question, but I had a comment in here. It's a lovely presentation. Over the years of doing research, health research, I've always seen how important gender issues are. I mean, sex has, it's important now. It is mandated now almost that all our research should be highlighted by sex at the very least, but the impact of gender. And so I noted your engagement and the SDGs, but what about SDG 3? We all get very, very busy at our own desks, and despite best intentions of wanting to do work, in gender, and even the results we end up seeing within sickle cell disease, where girls and starting from girls and young women perform differently in their outcomes. But it'll be great to have, some engagement with SDG 3 as well. But congratulations on a fabulous presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I agree with you fully. Yes, it intersects with SDG 3 as well, which of course is health and well-being. And when we think about equality, we've been having conversations about it as a public health issue, which you might have been part of, Monica, where we really start to see these intersections, even in terms of crime and violence and communication. So 100% with you.
Yes.
100%.
We must move on to research of our own at the UWI in this area. So,
yes.
Thank you so much, Monica. We appreciate that. We have two questions. Livingston, you're first, and then Patrick. Go ahead, Livingston.
Hi, good morning, or good day, Dr. Barrett. Like
Yes.
my colleague Monica at Mona Campus, this popped up in the email this morning, and so I left another meeting to come to this. Okay, so happy to see the presentation. I am happy how you made the point about the interconnectedness of the SDGs. So although you're presenting only on SDG 5, they're related. There's a time I thought that, if you could only solve SDG 1, poverty, yeah, as a root cause to everything, but they're all interconnected. Gender inequality leads to poverty, but poverty also leads to gender issues, yes? How much in your work, Dr. Barrett, do you take us even deeper, into trauma, a trauma approach? Benjamin Perks from UNICEF recently put out a book, Trauma Proof. I think it came out last year. And he was looking at this idea that, we need to delve even deeper into the issues. We're looking at probably just current data, but how much of the work do you try to get back into? How did we end up like this, based on our past? And is there any trauma proofing in your work?
Thank you so much, Dr. White, for your time and for your question. Yes, indeed. At the IGDS, as you know, we've been exploring trauma. I think Professor Morgan, now retired, would have been the most explicit through her work on gender violence and trauma. But trauma as part of our colonial inheritance. And when we think of the norms framework, the social factors combined with behavioral drivers. We've been doing some work for the UN around gender transformative change. We consider trauma as one of those, not just root causes, but one of those framing devices, one of those things that we must account for both in terms of the historical, but in terms of its contemporary functioning, how it shapes how we see each other and see ourselves, how we do what we do, and then how responsive we are. One of those challenges we face in the route to equality is confronting and mitigating the ideological and the philosophical. And many of those confrontations rest in what we are inheriting from traumas, both those that are explicit to us and those that are implicit to experience. So yes, I think I agree with you how significant it is. And I would say we've been working through it, a moderate commitment, but it is at the center of our goal.
One more question quickly. I know your background is in communication as well. And in response to that, I saw the colonial legacy. So I know it's there in your work. A comment on parasocial relationships, especially what's happening now with a lot of male influencers. Your perspective on that in the Caribbean, parasocial relationships with male influencers and how it's impacting the work in gender.
I think there are two effects. Just to answer generally so that we make some space for Patrick. One, parasocial relationships, the online community, how men are engaging with each other can have and has had and continue to have some very enabling impacts where men can develop their engagement, develop their positive relationships through modeling and through trying to contend with ideals. It's not the majority by any means. This is more of, let's say, a minority case analysis. But what we're seeing more so is backlash, yeah? Where we have these relationships being formed and reformed to reinvest in patriarchal limitations, to reinvest in, I would suggest, and you would forgive me for re-traumatizing both men and women, boys and men and boys, women and girls, and gender non-conforming people, where there's a harkening back and a desire for some sort of perfect past where power relations were sustained according to unequal privilege relationships. So these social relations then suggest gaps, suggest shortcomings, suggest ways of being, suggest hierarchy, suggest so much, even symbolic and actual violence that is expressed. And so we use these non-censored platforms to assert ourselves, but also to undermine the uncomfortable, the taboo, and the feeling of, let's say, zero-sum beliefs. If we have gains and we are striding closer to equality to give everybody a chance, then it's taking away my chance. So I know that's a kind of long answer, but it has its positives to build community, but it has its negatives to undermine our agreed progress.
You have the multidisciplinary perspective to be able to make the connections, the gender and the communication. Okay, thanks.
Thank you for that. Patrick, please go ahead.
Thanks. I'm actually happy you extended the response because I wanted to ask two questions in the context of what could be treated as comments as well. You had a earlier in the presentation, you had a point about, being asked by media about where we are in terms of, so much being achieved. And I'm reflecting and thought that I would just put it out there, not necessarily for a specific response, no, but, at what point will we know that what we consider to be structural patriarchy is no longer such a powerful factor in determining the advancement that would have been made in terms of gender equality, equity, and certainly justice? Is there something to reflect on? Because there are goals, and in a sense, they are not necessarily as specific in their outcomes. And I'm wondering if there is, for those of us particularly involved in in questioning what's happening, whether we shouldn't, get to the point where that is not so much the frame around which we advance the conversation. And the second point you made about, we're part, it's related of a capitalist, liberal, patriarchal society. And again, another question jumped out, are we really and truly liberal? And in the case of the Caribbean in particular, where the influence seemed to be much more about conservative patriarchy rather than liberal patriarchy, whether it's not just, whether those values, the conservative values, are not, shouldn't we also be considering those as probably even more important than the liberal values? That's kind of holding us back from how we think about the binaries, or within and without these binary notions of gender equality, gender equity, empowerment, agency, all of that. I just thought I would, put that in the mix.
Yeah, those are very good observations. Just to put the last one, when I say liberal, I'm referring to the economic system. So I agree with you. Yes, we're 100% conservative, but we're also very nuanced as well, in that we are contradictory in our conservativeness. So we, at one hand, extremely conservative, but on the other hand, extremely open. The Caribbean is a unique space where we are constantly clashing with those elements within ourselves, within our communities, and within our nations. Secondly, our economies, being capitalist, are supposedly liberal or neoliberal. And so we are about opening it up to the market, having trickle-down economies, expanding. But we see that it's not necessarily as diffused as we think, but that's the basis upon which we are operating. But it is problematic, and all of the economists will say better for you. And our societies, as Dr. White had said, if we could just deal with SDG 1, then we could get more transformation. But as we will know, some of these conditions prop up systems that benefit those who do not necessarily name themselves, but name the world. And in terms of the endpoint, when we know we reach, this is not my original idea, but there are a lot of scholars who say there really isn't any endpoint when it comes to gender equality. it is a continuous journey. You know, Bell Hooks says a political commitment for all of us, men and women, boys and girls, gender non-conforming people, because we're up against power. And power, be it network, be it de facto, be it diffuse, be it de jure, be it whatever, power is not based in equality and equity. Power is a different notion. It's about influence and let's say the triggers of influence. So for us as a people, and when I talk about it, I'm not only talking about gender, but if we think about race, ethnicity, phenotype, class, country, just in the Caribbean, we realize that we have to persist with this work and fundamentally probably would not reach to the point where, okay, we happy. And that's something I think it can be a little bit disconcerting and discouraging, but it's a necessary kind of frame for us to keep in mind, I suggest.
Yeah, the pedagogy of hope and the pedagogy of community. I mean, and we know Bell Hooks strong proponent of, also point to us that does embrace the notion that you really need to construct a particular frame so that in fact you don't make it frustrating for older folks like me to think that we are not necessarily, getting to the point at which we ought to get. Anyways, thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you so much, Doc.
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions? I did see one from Anne. Dr. Barrett, do you want to answer that?
Anne had a question.
Chat. Oh, maybe you can't see it. Okay.
I'm not seeing it.
Right, that's fine. Sure. Her question is there any consideration towards recruitment efforts when UE hires for positions of management? I believe she's talking about consideration of gender equity and equality.
Actually, definitely. So, the UE gender policy was updated in 2020 to 23 from its 2016 version. And that took a lot of discussion and debate headed by the Vice Chancellor's office. And of course, IGDS would have supported that process along with the one UE Gender Justice Committee, Regional Committee. Right now, in order to make sure that we actually adhere to our policy interventions, which is but we have been conducting research across the campuses, across the region, all 5, to understand how we are dealing with one of those things, recruitment practices, along with many other things, well-being, work-life balance, equity, discrimination, and so much more. And we are doing that, and we are hoping that by the end of this academic year, we have, even if it's preliminary results, but some partial report, so that we can double check our system. Now, the UE has a very vibrant and very thorough system for recruitment. We have to admit that if we are familiar with it. But we still have instances where we may see points where we're like, okay, this does not meet what we agree to be our standards, our policy position. So that research and that kind of reflection, looking in at ourselves to then enhance our actions, it's happening as we speak. So to answer your question directly, it is being considered. How quickly it happens will depend on the machinery and bureaucracy, but we hope that it happens sooner than later.
Thank you so much, Dr. Barrett, and thank you for a wonderful presentation. I'm going to ask everyone to give Dr. Barrett a hand just to say thank you for all that she did today. She has been an excellent presenter.
Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. So my last comment to you, ladies and gentlemen, is that this presentation was put on by the International School for Development Justice at the University of the West Indies, and the focus on SDG 5. We will have a program in gender justice, activism, and sustainable development. I would encourage you to go to the website. I will put the website in the chat for you and take a look. There will be programs that you can apply to. Thank you so much. I wish you all a marvelous rest of your day. Dr. Bird, if you could just hold on for 1 minute, and the rest of you have a marvelous day, and thank you so much for coming.